Hi, this is Doug Sharp with Canada Family Action, and you know, these days I am not often startled when I come across things in the world of citizen action that I didn't notice or know about before. I guess the sheer number of times I see examples of things like discrimination against Christians or child predators being given too many chances to reoffend, as they often do, or parents' rights and religious freedoms being stripped away, I guess I'm just desensitized somewhat and now don't get knocked off my stride that often. However, recently, I came across something in the newly revised and extremely controversial sex education curriculum of Premier Wynne's in Ontario that really threw me. I'm talking about a real deep concern over what I saw, and it was something I didn't even notice before when I read through the 239-page curriculum guide. Now, I know that not everyone has read the guide, and not everyone even knows that this is going to be part of their children's future. However, just let me start by reminding you about where some of the parents' concerns are with regard to this controversial curriculum. The new revised version of the sex ed curriculum is the slightly revised version of the curriculum that surfaced briefly back in 2010 when it was introduced by Premier Dalton McGuinty and then was hastily hooked and shelved a short time later because of the understandable backlash from the parents of Ontario. Now, they were all horrified to see what the government of the day was proposing to place in front of their children, and their opposition to the curriculum was very vocal, to say the least. The 2010 curriculum would have taught 6-year-olds about sexual parts of the body and 8-year-olds about homosexuality and gender identity. That is, the idea that it's okay and normal to have a male body but self-identify as a woman and vice versa. It would have taught 10-year-olds that gender identity and sexual orientation cannot be changed, and given 6th graders instruction on the pleasures of masturbation and vaginal lubrication. Now, in grade 7, 12-year-olds would have learned all about vaginal and anal intercourse. Now, these were all part of what they called in the day equity and inclusive education strategy, and it was to be taught to young children starting in kindergarten. So as you can see, it caused a bit of a stir. This is pretty controversial to some. Fast forward to today, the Minister of Education in 2010, who helped cobble together the original controversial sex education curriculum, is now the Liberal government Premier, Kathleen Wynne, and she has vowed to introduce this revised version in the form that it is now, that it's been published in. So let's take a quick look at the introduction of this new curriculum and see what Premier Wynne is going to be teaching the children of Ontario now. The first page says, of course, the document replaces the Ontario curriculum. We know that. And then it says, beginning in September of 2015, all health and physical education programs for grades 1 to 8 will be based on the expectations outlined in this document. Now, page 1 goes on to say that this new Ontario curriculum recognizes that today and in the future, students need to be critically literate in order to synthesize information and make informed decisions, communicate effectively, and thrive in an ever-changing global community. It is important for students to be connected to the curriculum to see themselves in what is being taught. So remember, as we go through this curriculum, that it is their government's intention to connect your children to this curriculum and insert them into it to the degree that they see themselves in it. So what does the Liberal government of Ontario now want to see your children connected to and in? Well, let's have a look. Let's start on page 197. Now, the curriculum, I should say before we get started, is written in many parts with examples using teacher prompts and student responses. Now, the prompts themselves are written out as a script in the guide for the teacher to follow and for the student to respond to. The curriculum does say, however, that the teacher doesn't have to stick directly to the script, neither does the student in this case. However, I'll share the scripts with you as they're presented. Okay, page 197. This is for grade 7 children, so we're talking about 12-year-olds here. Here is a student response script for a 12-year-old child. The student response starts out as this. Quote, HIV is transmitted through contact with bodily fluids, semen, blood, vaginal fluids, anal fluid, and breast milk, unquote. So the government of Ontario's view is that your child needs to learn about vaginal and anal fluid when they're 12 years old. A little further down the page in the same paragraph of the script, under the student prompt section, the student is supposed to say that, quote, one of the best things you can do to stop HIV is to stop the stigma that is associated with having the infection, unquote. Now, one of the best things you can do to stop HIV is to stop the stigma of HIV. One of the best ways, really? Well, that doesn't sound like very good science to me, but we'll just move on, leave that with you. Is your 12-year-old, more importantly, ready to have a discussion with his teacher about HIV, anal or vaginal fluid? That could be a better question. Whatever you believe about the issue, is this really something you say to a child in grade 7? Now, how about a grade 8? Those are your 13-year-olds on page 215. This is a teacher prompt. So the script the teacher has in front of them when they're connecting with your child is this, quote, how would thinking about your personal limits and making a personal plan influence the decisions you may choose to make about sexual activity? So the question to the child is about making a personal plan to build sexual activity into it at the age of 13 years old. Okay, I'll leave that with you too. Grades 1, let's look at grade 1. That's 6 years old, page 93. And that's about identifying body parts, including genitalia. Penis, testicles, vagina, and vulva is listed as the names that they should know. Page 199, let's go back to grade 7s. Again, 12 years old. The teacher prompt is, quote, thinking about your sexual health is complicated. It's important to have a good understanding of yourself before getting involved with someone else. It's not just about making a decision to have sex or waiting until you're older. It's also about things such as your physical readiness, your sexual orientation and gender identity, and your understanding of your own body, including what gives you pleasure. Now, do children really have the capacity to make decisions about engaging, first off, in sex at 12 years old? Or how about understanding the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity? Isn't the jury, for one thing, still out on some of these issues? Isn't there still a need for a serious adult conversation regarding gender identity, for example? We just had a situation. It's so fresh in my mind because it just happened, where a competent group of senators in Ottawa spent months discussing the complexities of a bill related to gender identity. And in this particular curriculum, this gender identity issue is introduced as a concept to children at 12 years old, and does so right before opening up the discussion to, quote, what gives your child pleasure, unquote. Do they really have the capacity to be exposed to these one-sided perspectives and like this in grade 7? Children discussing anal fluid, 6 genders, making a plan for sex, all conversations with a teacher at their school? Now it goes on and on, age-inappropriate information being presented to young children along with concepts and theories like gender, all presented from a very one-sided perspective, all potentially harmful to young children. However, I'm going to leave it there because I believe there's another threat to the children that is far more dangerous in this document, something I never noticed before in the curriculum, something you may not have been aware of either. Now here, let me show you something. In another part of the sex education curriculum, the Ontario government identifies the importance of the various people that are going to have access to your child under the new curriculum in a section called Roles and Responsibilities. Now, in this section, it identifies parents, of course, and says that the parents play, quote, an important role. Now, note, it's not a primary role that they deem it. It's just an important role. They want the parent to be involved and familiar with the curriculum so they can better appreciate what is being taught to their children and what their children are, quote, expected to learn. Now, hold on, though. There are others who also have important roles that are identified in this section. I'm going to share that with you. They are called community partners. Now, please remember that phrase, community partners. In the section called Roles and Responsibilities on page 17 of the curriculum, it says that community partners also have an important role to play. Note that they use the exact same word again that they use to describe the parent's role. It says community partners are an important resource for the school's health and physical education program, relationships with public health units, community recreation facilities, community mental health organizations, and hospitals and social service agencies and universities and colleges and businesses and service groups, and here it is, other community organizations that can provide expertise, skills, materials, and programs that are not available through the school or that supplement those that are, unquote. So on page 18 of the curriculum, it encourages schools and school boards to, quote, play a role coordinating efforts with these community partners. Community partners such as a community health center or an Aboriginal health access center. Facilities, in the case of Aboriginal children, that can address spiritual well-being, as they say, in addition to physical and mental health. Now, on that same page, the curriculum encourages teachers to find opportunities for your children to get out into the community and engage in mentoring projects with these partners. Now, out in the community and outside the classroom, to engage with someone else, like mentors, my first question, of course, maybe yours, is like who? And how does the school choose these community partners who are these people who will engage your children and mentor them? Well, like all good curriculums across the country appear to be designed to do these days, they always publish the questions you are supposed to ask, along with the appropriate answer that they've already put together for you. So you didn't have to look very hard in the guide to find the conveniently provided answer to that question a little bit further down the page on page 18. And where the guide says, quote, in choosing community partners, schools should build on existing links with their local communities and create new partnerships in conjunction with ministry and school board policies. Makes sense. They go on to say that these links are especially beneficial if they have direct connections to the curriculum. Now, teachers may find opportunities for students, that's your children, to participate in community events, for example, especially events that support the students' learning that happens in the classroom. So the community partners are going to have access to your children in the classroom and at events outside the school, perhaps, as well as they are also going to be providing expertise, skills, materials, and programs that are not available through the school itself. And apparently these materials and programs have not been reviewed by parents and are not a part of the published curriculum guides. However, these community partners will be providing information that is directly connected to the curriculum itself. Now, are they referring to existing organizations, do you think, that have this kind of expertise and skills and programs? Well, in British Columbia, the BC Teachers Federation conveniently lists a bunch of community partners, so let's have a look at who's out there right now serving on a national level that might also be called upon in Ontario to engage your children and mentor them. Well, here's one. Let's start with this one. It's called teachingsexualhealth.ca. And here's another one. It's called sexualityandyou.ca. And these two organizations have been known to work together. And as it turns out, these two organizations have and had a direct influence on the creation of the curriculum, so they would clearly be considered community partners and would have access to the children of Ontario under the new curriculum guidelines. So let's see what kind of resources these two community partners have published that give us a better idea of who they are. Here's one. Here's one document. Let's look at the first document. It's a document called It's Easier Than You Think. Now, when you look over this document, this particular document, it's published in a guide-style format, and it's intended for parents to help to talk to their kids about sexual health and well-being. And you can clearly see that as the document starts out. On page 1 of the guide, there is a statement made, however. It's one of the very first statements made, and it is, quote, "We are all sexual beings from birth until death," unquote. Now, many parents would not agree that children are sexual beings at birth. However, that is a statement that is made, and it is made as a statement of fact on the first page of this document. Now, on page 2, there is what they call a brief summary of normal sexual development that they've published. In the first section of that page, for infants up to 2 years old, they state, quote, "Pleasant, loving touch helps babies feel secure and cared for. All babies explore their bodies and learn that touching their sexual organs feels good. As they acquire language, they need to hear correct names for sexual body parts, like the penis, breasts, and vulva," unquote. So you can see where the influence of the curriculum may have come from in Ontario for teaching children in grade 1 the names of parts of their body. Now, for children from 3 to 5 years old, this particular guide says, quote, "Many children this age touch their sexual organs for comfort or pleasure. We must assure them it is normal to masturbate while gently teaching them to do it in private," unquote. According to the guide, children 6 to 8 years old are then informed about where babies come from, issues about gender identity, and that masturbation at this age has now become more about pleasure than anything else. So this community partner's view on when things should be introduced to young children clearly seems to line up with Premier Wynne's and the Government of Ontario's views on the very same subject. And surely they will have access to your child and connect with them and mentor them under the new plan. Now let's go a little bit further into the guide. Now on the second last page of the guide, there is a section that's called Teen Sexuality Decision Making. And in this particular section of the guide, it states the importance of making a sexual plan and giving teens the opportunity to make decisions that are right for them. They say the reason is because, quote, 50% of Canadian students have had intercourse by the age of 17, unquote. So they must have some stats to back up that up, I'm assuming. Now, they also define the need to help your children strive for what they refer to as an ethical sexual relationship. Now, this is not a phrase I had ever heard of before, so I had to read up on it, and it turns out that the ethical sexual relationship is a concept that comes from somebody by the name of Reverend Deborah W. Hafner, and she is the director of Religious Institute on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing. Now, when I first saw this, I have to say, hey, wait, that's a reverend. And I had to admit, I mean, I was extremely encouraged when I first saw this particular name on the document. I mean, religion's not allowed in the schools anymore, and there's no talk of God, faith, or morality. And now, in this guide, there's a beacon of light, as I thought, and a reverend is given a place to talk about something called ethical sexual morality. And this is going to be somebody that's also going to be put in a position to perhaps be a community partner, and that will have access to the children of Ontario and will be able to mentor and influence them under the curriculum guidelines. So I just said, please tell me more about this Reverend Deborah Hafner and the Religious Institute on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing. Sounds like a great place. Well, the guide offers up this quote from the Reverend to help us get to know her a little bit better. So it's published right in this particular guide, a quote from Reverend Hafner, where she says, quote, "We need to acknowledge that the so-called norm of premarital chastity has never applied to the majority of young people. It is time to call for ethical sexual relationships that, regardless of the age, marital status, or sexual orientation of the participants, are consensual, non-exploitive, honest, mutually pleasurable, and protected against sexual transmitted diseases and unintended pregnancies. These criteria are the same for adults and adolescents, the abled and disabled, single and married partners, and people of all sexual orientations." Unquote. Okay, well, that's a little concerning because I got to ask you, does that sound like any reverend or pastor that you're familiar with? Or does that sound like it acknowledges in any way the sanctity of marriage? This is what the Reverend has said. Does it sound like it's in any way God-honoring? And the Reverend said it. Like I was, you're probably now wondering who exactly is this Reverend Hafner, this highly influential community partner, so-called community partner, who will have access to the young children and whose ideas and beliefs will be given a place in the schools in Ontario and across Canada. So let's have a little bit deeper look at who this is. Reverend Deborah Hafner is, of course, as I mentioned, the executive director of a place called the Religious Institute. Now, online, if you go online, you can see that it's defined as a multi-faith, non-profit organization dedicated to sexual health, education, and justice. And Reverend Hafner also was the CEO of an organization called SICUS, or the Sexuality, Information, and Education Council of the United States. And while she worked there, she created things like they were called the Religious Declaration on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing, something called the National Coalition to Support Sexual Education, the Commission on Adolescent Sexual Health, and the guidelines for a comprehensive sexuality education for kindergarten through grade 12. So clearly, with credentials so aligned with Premier Wynne's beliefs about child sex education, she's someone who must have been a key player in the development of the new sex education curriculum in Ontario and perhaps across the whole country. So let's look a little further at the Reverend. Prior to joining SICUS, Reverend Hafner worked at Planned Parenthood, who of course is right out in front teaching children about sex and promoting their views on sexual orientation and gender identity. Reverend Hafner has several degrees, very impressive. She's a real go-getter, clearly. I mean, this is a very credentialed person. And finally, she is also an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister. and is endorsed by in a community down in Westport, Connecticut. It's a Unitarian church in Westport, Connecticut. Now, again, I have to admit, I wasn't really familiar at all with what a Unitarian Universalist is, so I turned to the web to get the definition. And it turns out, if you go to the web and you just punch in Unitarian Universalist, you'll find out that what they believe in is, first, that each person is free to search his own or her own personal truth on issues such as the existence, nature, and meaning of life, something that people want to know about, obviously, a lot, deities, creation, and the afterlife. So they can come up with their own ideas. The definition goes on to say that the theology of individual Unitarian Universalists ranges widely. However, the majority of them are humanist. Now, a humanist? I mean, when I saw that, I just went, you mean the ones that follow the doctrines of, like, the humanist manifestos that you see on the internet? It's what they sort of, their Bible kind of a thing. Okay, if it is, then we're in a situation where God's been removed from the schools. There's no open expression or acknowledgement of his sovereignty that's allowed. There's no prayer. There's no open exhibitions of faith, and there's no bless yous when someone sneezes in some schools. And up against this backdrop, parents of children who are raised in families of faith, families who honor God and believe in things very different than what is being taught in this new curriculum, these parents are being told to stand down and keep their bigoted thoughts to themselves while sex education is being taught to their children by humanist community partners inside and outside the school. Now, do you see something happening here? Like, parents, please, if you ignore everything else about what I say today, or simply choose just to follow up on one thing, let it be this. If your child's school in Ontario or anywhere proposes taking your child out of the school or has anyone come into the school as a community partner to engage your child or mentor your child, please vigorously scrutinize who this person is and what organization or group they are from. Meticulously comb through every word of what proposed community events, for example, are going to be promoted and modeled for your children to connect with. And find out what their objectives are, the history of the events, and who the organizers are. Because I can absolutely assure you that they are planning on taking your child out of the school to these events that have, in their words, quote, direct connections to the curriculum. Also, please understand that the community partners of the schools they're referring to in the curriculum already exist. Don't be deceived. They helped forge together the curriculum guide, making it possible in the end to have full access to your children during school hours. They're not just a vague list of organizations that will come around by chance and be evaluated on an ad hoc basis by your child's school. They are well-established, well-prepared, well-funded, often well-funded with your tax dollars put to work by the Ontario provincial government, and all for the purpose of teaching your child a new humanist religion. Now, my question there is, what happened to the Holy Grail of pluralism? The very thing you were trying to protect when God was shown the door in so many schools so many years ago. Now, you may be saying, oh, Doug, you're such an alarmist. Well, you know what? Perhaps I am. It's true. I'm sounding the alarm. But I definitely think it's time. Okay, now, just two quick things, and then I'm done. First, if you would like to receive a list of some of the other community partners that are on the list that your school is probably going to provide access to your children for, just send me an email, and I'll send you out not only the list that I have and I've come across, but also several other documents that'll help you better understand the attack that's been launched on children in this way all across the country. So send me an email to president@familyaction.ca. That's president@familyaction.ca. Now I'll reply right away with the names of some of the community partners and information about who they are and what they want to teach your children. Now, finally, let me just share these last things with you. A few quotes you can find online related to the humanist religion. They are in part a part of the Humanist Manifesto, which was written in 1973 and was intended to update and replace the previous version, which was published first in 1933. So here's the first quote from the Religion of Humanism. "No deity will save us. We must save ourselves." And here's another one. "We are responsible for what we are and what we will be." Now, both these statements definitely present difficulties for Christian parents of school-age children, don't you think? And Jewish parents and Muslim parents, or anyone else for that matter, who believes in the doctrines of submission to the will of an all-powerful God. Now, another quote in the Humanist Manifesto update of 1973 is one which clearly reveals their view of the role that public education should play in the mentoring of your children. That's a quote by John Dunphy. Now, you may have heard this before, but please, let me just share it again. John Dunphy says, "I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public schoolroom classroom by teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. The rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism, resplendent with the promise of a world in which the never-realized Christian ideal of love thy neighbor will finally be achieved." Unquote. So isn't it obvious? The classroom has become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. Teachers have become the proselytizers of a new faith. A religion of humanity has taken hold in education. And under the authority of Premier Wynne's new sex education curriculum, they're about to kick the front doors of the schools of Ontario wide open, just like many jurisdictions of Canada already have, to community partners who can engage and mentor your children as they have been planning to do for decades. Parents, please stand together against this most recent assault on families of faith in Ontario. Don't let Premier Wynne and her government's humanist religion affect your children. Don't let them tell you your religious beliefs are out of date, bigoted, or intolerant. Because the real truth is that in Premier Wynne's mind, your religious beliefs are just taking up the space that she wants her religious beliefs to occupy. The space inside the hearts and minds of your children. The space that you have been nurturing and protecting in them since they were born. The place inside your child that you have countless time prayed will always honor God. Please don't give up, parents of Ontario. Please continue to fight the good fight. It is a fight worth winning and fighting and winning. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen today. I look forward to supporting you in any way we can here at Canada Family Action. Have a great day.